I want to get just a personal question for you at this point. I mean, there was this cancellation you spoke of. This was, you used the words damned blacks. Was that what it was? And I believe you meant damned as in large numbers.
Well, let's frame it in context. What I was talking about was, this was when the world went mad. We're celebrating the fifth anniversary of it. It all started this weekend.
Was it with Alex O'Connor you were talking to? Who were you speaking with?
No. It was poor little Darren Grimes.
It was Darren.
Little Darren. He's actually quite big, but I always think of him as being very small.
Well, he's very sweet.
But little sweet Darren. Anyway, who didn't behave in a very sweet fashion, it has to be said.
Oh.
But that's another matter. What it was at the time we'd had lockdown, everybody was mad. Everybody went mad in 2010.
Yes.
2020 rather.
Yeah.
It really is important we understand this. COVID was an act of national madness, as we can now see. It's very typical. Epidemic illness regularly produces this effect because of fear, because of the excitement of trying to do something about it, and so on. It's wonderfully described by Lord Macaulay, the great 19th century historian, as there is nothing as ridiculous as the British public in one of its periodic fits of morality. If you remember, we became very moral. Yes. Everybody spied on each other.
Yes.
Well, they did. Some of us didn't, but lots of people did. This absurd act of public worship for our NHS of turning out and beating saucepans. Can you imagine British people doing that?
Well, you wanted rituals and pomp and ceremony.
That's right. But these were perversions. These were perversions. And one of the greatest perversions took place because that summer there was, of course, the murder of George Floyd, and the vast, preposterous overreaction to it, the way in which the entire critical race theory movement pounced on it and exploited it, and the whole thing blew up into the preposterous Black Lives Matter. Now, why did I enter into that debate? Why did my tongue slip so badly? Because it did slip. I'm prepared to criticize other people. I will acknowledge error myself. Why was I involved in it? Because why again was Black Lives Matter picked up here in the way that it was? Because remember, our police force is so unviolent, shockingly ill-prepared, unfit, undisciplined rabble. Yeah. Which is what they've become, as opposed to what they used to be. But anyway, as it were, the more important point is that we have the least violent police force in the world, I would argue. There's abundant evidence. So why did all of this build up in the way that it did? It is... Why is Black Lives? Why did you see all the jumpers on bandwagons like Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner all fussing themselves? Do you remember that preposterous scene of them kneeling alone in their Portcullis House office, looking vaguely silly as they were actually photographed kneeling alone? Because, of course, for once they were actually obeying COVID rules, unlike when they were in Durham. But that's an entirely different matter. We may get on to that. Anyway, why was it all built up in the way that it is? Why has there been this enormous prominence of slavery in the British version of woke? See, I think what we've got to understand is that there's been a very deliberate attack on the entire foundation of all that we've been talking about in the last hour or so. It began, curiously enough, in Germany, that with the Second World War, with the horrors of Nazism taking place in the country in Europe, whose culture and civilization, if you look at painting, if you look at literature, if you look at poetry, if you look at philosophy, if you look at scholarship, had been the exemplar of civilization. Yeah. How had that happened? What do we do about it? And of course, the fact that this people had descended into the savagery and the horror of the Holocaust, of the concentration camps, led to the whole of that extraordinary experience of early German history being, to use an academic term, delegitimized.
Yeah. Careful with that arm.
With
the Sig Heiling going on in America. As you speak about the Weimar,
I'm so arthritic. I couldn't even do an Elon. Yeah. But that is wonderful. I couldn't even do an Elon. But what happens is German history is delegitimized. And there's been an attempt ever since to do the same using slavery. In other words, the fact that the Germans commit the Holocaust delegitimates German history. There has been this attempt in both Britain and in America to claim that slavery is another genocide, and therefore all the claims to civilization of Britain, that greatness that I was talking about, is obliterated, is a mere hypocrisy. All the claims to America of greatness of 1776, of the Declaration of Independence, of the Constitution, these are all morally mere hypocrisy. And American history begins instead in 1619 with the introduction of slavery. Now, it seems to me this is simply a lie. The point that I was making is slavery is horrible. Of course, slavery is horrible. But slavery is universal. That's to say, I cannot think of a single culture that hasn't practiced slavery. Yeah. And the one thing that is peculiar about Britain is that it pioneered its abolition. That's the only thing that's peculiar about it. But what is particularly important is the notion that slavery was a genocide. In other words, all these careful details of the Western Passage, of the awful journey across the Atlantic, when indeed sometimes up to a third of the cargo of the ship, usually considerably less, because remember, they were quite valuable. You didn't want them to die. You wanted them to get over there so that you could sell them. But anyway, this argument that it was a genocide, and the point that I was actually making is you cannot have a genocide if the alleged genocidal population actually multiplies. And what is remarkable is only, I think it's as low, it's in the hundreds of thousands. Only, I think it's maybe only 3, I may have got that one wrong, but it's a very small number of hundreds of thousands of black slaves actually go to the 13 colonies, from which this enormous population of blacks in America springs. Now, how can you have a genocide that multiplies people, hence so many damn blacks, I'm afraid. Yes.
Don't say it again.
As in that sense. I mean, yes. it was, and also, let me again be honest, it's so many damn books and whatever. There was another element, wasn't there? I was absolutely sick and tired of the sight of the breaking of rules and the indulgence of the police in allowing BLM parades in London, of the fact that Churchill's statue had to be boarded up, Westminster was defaced, people kowtowing before this mob, and the sheer total falseness of the thing. So I think, if I'm honest, there was also a certain element of damned in a qualitative sense as well as a quantitative one.
That is very honest of you, because you don't need to admit that.
Well, isn't it sensible to?
No.
I think it is
from
sensible.
your perspective, no. I'm happy you are, though.
No. I always believe in trying to be honest.
So do I. But it doesn't mean it's sensible.
Well, it is past. And I think I can defend very adequately in our retrospect, as we're now, everybody apart from the government and the Commission of Inquiry, the preposterous thing under the preposterous Baroness Hallett is asking serious questions about what went on in 2020. Let this be another serious question as to how this preposterous nonsense of BLM was allowed to happen and how it was indulged. And of course, setting a pattern of indulgence that we have seen with the Palestinian demonstrations and whatever. Absolutely shocking takeover of the centre of our city by an aggressive and profoundly, I think, dangerous minority.
I agree.